Welcome to Damon Revenge Stories. Get ready for tales of sweet revenge.
My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm 41 years old. 3 months ago, I sat in my parked car outside my own restaurant at 11 o'clock at night, holding a cloned tablet in my lap, listening to my wife tell my brother exactly how they were going to steal everything I'd built. The screen glowed against my chest like a small blue fire, and through the open window, I could smell rosemary from my own kitchen. Renee's voice was clear, almost cheerful, like she was planning a vacation. She said, "Once the power of attorney activates, we file the LLC amendment and you get 49%. He won't even read the documents while he's recovering. And Devin, my little brother, the kid I used to let lick the brownie batter off the spatula." He laughed. He laughed the way you laugh when someone hands you something you've been waiting for. I need you to understand what happened next. Because the story of how I went from that parked car to the night I took my life back is the reason I'm telling you any of this. Before I go any further, if you're the kind of person who has ever sat up at night wondering whether someone you love is working against you, if you've ever felt that pull in your gut that tells you something is wrong, but you can't name it, I want you to stay with me. Welcome to our channel. This is a place where we tell the truth about what happens behind closed doors, in families, in marriages, in the quiet rooms where people plan things they'd never say out loud. If this story reaches you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what city you're listening from. And if any of this sounds familiar, I already know. To understand how I ended up in that car, you have to go back 17 years. To a 24-year-old kid with a $6,000 loan and a dream that smelled like charred poblano peppers. My father, James Whitfield, gave me that money 2 weeks before he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He didn't know he was sick yet. He just knew his oldest son wanted to cook for people, and he believed that was enough reason to empty a savings account he'd spent 11 years filling. He handed me the check in the kitchen of his house in Bronzeville, and he said, "You make something, Marcus. You make something and you put your name on it." The food truck came first, a beat-up 2000 Tombersign step van I bought from a retired taco vendor on the south side. I stripped it, rebuilt the kitchen myself, welded a shelf for my father's portable turntable, a wood-paneled Sony from 1979 that he'd played Marvin Gaye on at every single family cookout. Since before I was born, that turntable sat on the pass-through shelf while I served smoked brisket sandwiches and collard green tacos at festivals and farmers markets across the city. Customers could hear What's Going On playing from half a block away. They followed the music to the food. My father never saw the truck. He died 6 weeks after writing that check. But that turntable was his voice riding with me every service. And when I finally opened the brick-and-mortar restaurant, a 48-seat farm-to-table place in Wicker Park that I called Whitfield's, I put it on a shelf in my office where I could see it every time I sat down to do payroll. Whitfield's took 4 years to build from the truck to the storefront. I signed the lease at 28, opened the doors at 29, and by 35 I had a restaurant that turned a genuine profit, a staff that stayed, and a reputation in the Chicago food scene that I earned plate by plate. My sous chef, a woman named Janelle, had been with me since the truck days. My head chef, Andre, came on when we opened the dining room and never left. I knew every vendor by first name. I knew the delivery drivers' kids' names. That restaurant was not an investment. It was not a brand. It was 17 years of my hands, my back, my father's money, and every morning I woke up at 4:30 to prep. I met Renee in 2015. Som 2018 at a charity dinner I catered for a nonprofit on the north side. She was working in medical device sales, sharp, beautiful, the kind of woman who made a room rearrange itself when she walked through it. She asked me 3 questions about the braised short ribs, and I was done. We were married 14 months later. Small ceremony. My brother Devin was my best man. My mother cried the whole time. The good kind of crying. The kind where your family is finally shaped the way you always hoped it would be. Devin. I have to talk about Devin now. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because loving someone and being disappointed by them can live in the same sentence for years without ever resolving. Devin is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the one who made everyone laugh, the one who could talk his way into and out of anything. But somewhere around 22, the charm became a substitute for effort. He lost his first job, a decent gig at a logistics company, because he stopped showing up on time. He lost his second job, a sales position, because he inflated his expense reports and someone noticed. He lost his third job, and by that point he'd stopped even pretending to be surprised when it happened. My mother called me every time. "Marcus, you have to help your brother. You're the one who made it. He's struggling." I just hungry. And every time I did. I covered his rent twice. I co-signed a car loan he defaulted on. I believed, with the kind of belief that only blood can generate, that Devin just needed one more chance, one more stable foundation, and he'd become the person I still saw when I looked at him. Saker sober sen servia more. Four-year-old kid helping me wash lettuce in a plastic basin at our father's Memorial Day cookout, laughing because the hose had splashed his shoes. 2 years ago, Devin lost his third job. I gave him a salaried position at Whitfield's. General manager. I created the title specifically for him, adjusted the org chart to make room, gave him a salary of $58,000 a year to oversee front-of-house operations and vendor relations. Renee thought it was a wonderful idea. She said, family takes care of family, Marcus. Your father would be proud." And I believed her because I believed everything. Here's the first thing you need to know about the anatomy of a con. It doesn't start with a lie. It starts with the person's own goodness being mapped, measured, and converted into a vulnerability. Every time I helped Devin, I was showing Renee and Devin exactly how far my loyalty would stretch. Every act of generosity was a data point. They weren't grateful. They were taking notes. The diagnosis came in January. Bicuspid aortic valve. My cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial, Dr. Adeyemi, showed me the imaging on a screen in her office and explained that the valve had been narrowing for years, but had reached a point where surgical replacement was the only safe option. Open heart surgery. 6-week recovery minimum. I sat in that office and I heard everything she said, but the only thing I could think about was the restaurant. 6 weeks off my feet. 6 weeks of someone else opening the doors, checking the walk-in, tasting the specials, signing the checks. Dr. Adeyemi said the surgery needed to happen within 60 days. I went home and told Renee. That night she held my face in her hands and said, "We're going to get through this together. I'll handle everything you need me to handle." And when she said it, her eyes were steady. Her thumbs were warm against my jaw, and I felt a wave of gratitude so deep, it almost brought me to my knees. This woman, this partner. Thank God I married someone I could trust with my life. She started making suggestions almost immediately, small ones at first. Maybe we should give Devin signing authority on the business checking account, just for emergencies, in case something comes up while you're in the hospital and I can't get there in time. It made sense. Devin was already the general manager. He was already at the restaurant every day. I signed the form at Chase on Michigan Avenue, added Devin as a co-signer, and that was that. One more act of trust, one more data point. Then a charge appeared on the business credit card. $2,200 to a business attorney named Craig Whitmore. I'd never heard of Craig Whitmore. I'd never retained Craig Whitmore. I asked Renee about it, and she didn't hesitate. Not even a blink. "Oh, I had him do a routine liability review for the restaurant. You know, with your surgery coming up, I just wanted to make sure everything was protected." I should have told you. I'm sorry, babe. She kissed my forehead. I filed it away. A wife protecting the business, while her husband prepared for surgery. That's what a good partner does. But something stayed. Not suspicion. Something lighter than that. A pebble in my shoe. I couldn't name it. Couldn't point to it, but I noticed I kept circling back to the $2,200. And every time I did, I noticed something else that was slightly off-center. Devin's behavior at the restaurant had changed. He was spending time with Andre and Janelle separately, taking them out for drinks after shifts. And the questions he was asking them weren't the questions a general manager asks. Janelle told me casually during a morning prep. Devin asked me about the lease terms last night, like the actual dollar amounts. I told him I didn't know the specifics. Andre mentioned the same thing a week later. Your brother wanted to know about supplier margins, gross margins. I thought maybe you'd asked him to look into it. I hadn't. Why would Devin need to know my lease terms? Why would he care about supplier margins unless he was evaluating the business as something other than a place he worked? My sleep started to break. Not dramatically. I didn't lie awake staring at the ceiling. I'd wake at 3 a.m. with a jolt. The kind that feels like you missed a step on a staircase. And I'd lie there with my heart pounding, trying to understand what my body already knew. My appetite shifted. Food, which had been the central joy of my life, started tasting like obligation. I'd eat because I knew I needed to. But the pleasure was gone, replaced by a low-grade nausea that followed me from morning until I finally fell into shallow sleep. Then Gloria called. Gloria Reyes has been my accountant for 9 years. She's meticulous, quiet, and she has the kind of relationship with numbers that some people have with music. She can hear when something is off before she can prove it. She called me on a Tuesday morning and said, Marcus, I need you to come in. Something's not matching. I drove to her office in Logan Square. She had 3 invoices spread across her desk from a supplier called Lakefront Provisions, LLC. The invoices totaled just over $8,000 across 3 months. I didn't recognize the name. Gloria said, There are no corresponding deliveries. I checked with your receiving logs. I called your known suppliers. Nobody has heard of Lakefront Provisions. She pulled up the LLC registration on the Illinois Secretary of State website. Lakefront Provisions LLC had been registered 5 months earlier. The registered address was Devin's apartment on North Kedzie. I remember the specific sensation of reading that address on Gloria's screen. It was like the floor of the room tilted 2 degrees to the left. Not enough to fall, just enough to lose your balance. Just enough to grab the edge of the desk and feel the wood grain under your fingertips. And think, this is real. This is a real thing I'm looking at. My brother set up a fake company and has been billing my restaurant for products that were never delivered. Gloria watched me process it. She said, Marcus, this could just be a mistake. Maybe Devin was trying to set up a legitimate vendor relationship and went about it the wrong way. I could see she didn't believe what she was saying. She was giving me an off-ramp, the way a good friend does when the truth is coming too fast. I took it. I said, Yeah, maybe. Let me talk to him. I didn't talk to him. I went home and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Renee was making dinner. She smiled when I walked in. I smiled back. The pebble in my shoe had become a stone. What happened next? I need to tell you carefully, because it was the moment that divided my life into before and after. Renee presented me with documents. She sat me down at the kitchen table. Our kitchen table, the one we bought together at a estate sale in Evanston. The one where we ate Sunday breakfast for 3 years. And she slid a manila folder across the surface toward me. Marcus, I've been working with my friend Jessica, the paralegal, to put together a simplified estate plan for us. With your surgery coming up, we need to be smart about this. Inside the folder was a durable power of attorney. It named Renee as sole agent. No co-agent. No oversight provision. No requirement to report to anyone. If I signed it, Renee would have complete legal authority over every financial and business decision in my life. The moment I went under anesthesia, I read it slowly. Renee watched me read it. I could feel her watching, the quality of her attention. And for the first time, I noticed something I'd been too loyal to see. She wasn't nervous. A wife handing her husband legal documents before major surgery should show at least a trace of discomfort. Some acknowledgement that the subject is heavy. Renee was calm, practiced. She had rehearsed this moment. Jessica said this is totally standard, she said. Everyone does this before surgery. It just makes sure nobody's hands are tied if something comes up. I looked at the document. I looked at Renee. I said, this looks good. Let me take it to the restaurant and read it one more time before I sign. I want to make sure I understand the legal language. She smiled. Of course, babe. Take your time. I took the document to Gloria the next morning. Gloria read it in her office, slowly, her reading glasses low on her nose, and when she looked up, her expression had changed. She said, Marcus, this gives her everything. The restaurant, the accounts, the real estate, the LLC. She'd have sole authority to make any decision, including amending the operating agreement while you're incapacitated. There's no check on this. There's no reporting requirement. I said, I know. Gloria said, do you know why she wants this? I said, not yet. And that was the moment. Right there, in Gloria's office, with the power of attorney lying on the desk between us like a loaded weapon, that something inside me shifted. Not broke. Shifted. Like a gear catching. The grief and confusion didn't disappear. They just moved to one side. And in the space they left, something colder and clearer took up residence. I stopped being a man trying to understand his wife's behavior. I became a man trying to understand the scope of what was being done to him. That night, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I cloned Renee's iPad. She'd left it synced to our shared iCloud account. And while she was in the shower, I sat on the edge of our bed and opened her message history. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the tablet steady enough to read their messages. I found 14 months of text conversations between Renee and Devin. 14 months. The messages predated my diagnosis by 3 months. They had been planning this before I ever sat in Dr. Adiemi's office. The messages were meticulous. Renee would text Devin updates about my financial state, my emotional state, my schedule. Devin would respond with questions about the restaurant's operational structure, the lease, the vendor relationships. Together, they had mapped out a complete takeover. There was a drafted LLC operating agreement in the message thread. An actual document, sent as a PDF between them, that gave Devin 49% ownership of Whitfield's and gave Renee control of my remaining 51% through the power of attorney I was supposed to sign. They had been working with the attorney, Craig Whitmore, the $2,200 charge, to draft the amendment. The liability review was never a liability review. It was the architecture of my dispossession. I scrolled through the messages for 3 hours. Every few minutes I had to set the tablet down because my vision blurred. Not from tears, but from the way your body refuses to process certain kinds of information. There's a physiological response to betrayal that I don't think has a name. It's not sadness and it's not anger. It's a kind of cellular confusion. Like every part of you is trying to recalibrate at the same time and nothing lines up. I found messages from 7 months ago where Renee told Devin that I'd added him as co-signer on the checking account. Devin's response was a row of celebration emojis. There were messages from 5 months ago when they discussed setting up lakefront provisions. Devin wrote, if I route the rebates through LP, we can pull at least 6 or 7K a month without triggering any flags. Renee wrote back, "Start small. Build the paper trail. By the time we file the amendment, it'll look like LP has been a legitimate vendor for a year." $74,000. That's what Gloria would eventually calculate they had siphoned through lakefront provisions over 9 months. $74,000 in fake invoices. Paid for my business account to a shell company registered at my brother's apartment. And then I found the message that I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. It was from Renee, dated 3 weeks before my diagnosis, before any of us knew about the valve condition. She wrote to Devin, "The business is worth at least $1.2 million with the lease and the equipment. If we can get him to restructure the LLC with both of us inside, we don't even need the medical angle. But if something medical comes up, that's our window." They had been waiting for an opportunity. My heart condition wasn't the cause of their plan. It was the accelerant. They'd been circling my life like architects studying a building they intended to demolish, and my diagnosis just told them where to place the charges. The next discovery I need to tell you about happened 3 days later, and it changed the nature of what I was facing from family betrayal to something with a legal name. I went to the restaurant at 6 in the morning, before anyone else arrived. I opened the vendor files in my office, the physical files, the paper copies I kept in a locked cabinet. I pulled every lakefront provisions invoice, 9 months of them, 23 invoices. And on each one, at the bottom, was my signature, my name, in my handwriting. Except it wasn't my handwriting. It was close enough that someone who wasn't looking wouldn't question it. But I've been signing my name on documents for 17 years in that restaurant. And I know the way my M drops slightly left and the way the tail of my D curves back. This was a stamp. Devin had created a signature stamp, a forged reproduction of my signature, and had been using it to authorize payments to his own shell company. I held one of the invoices up to the light in my office. The turntable was on the shelf behind me. I could see it in my peripheral vision. The wood paneling, the small Sony logo, the dust on the platter. My father's turntable sitting 3 feet from forged documents bearing a fake version of my name. Something about that proximity, the realest thing in my life next to the most fraudulent thing in my life, made me sit down in my chair and press both palms flat against the desk until my arm stopped trembling. I called Gloria. I said, "It's not a family dispute, Gloria. I need you to look at this." She came to the restaurant that morning before the staff arrived. I showed her the invoices, the stamp signatures, the lakefront provisions registration. She put on her reading glasses, examined 3 invoices, set her glasses on the desk, and looked at me for a full minute without speaking. Then she said, "Marcus, I'm your accountant, not a detective. I can't do this." But she picked up the next invoice, and the next. And by that afternoon, she had started what would become a 47-page forensic financial report tracing every dollar that had moved through lakefront provisions, every forged signature, every payment that didn't match a delivery. When she showed me the completed total 3 weeks later, $74,000, she said, "This isn't a family dispute, Marcus. This is embezzlement." Now, I need to tell you about the hardest thing I've ever done, and it wasn't the surgery. I went home that night and I made dinner for Renee. Grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, a lemon vinaigrette I've been making since the food truck days. I plated it on the good dishes. I poured her a glass of the Sancerre she likes. She came into the kitchen, saw the table, put her hand over her heart and said, "Marcus, you didn't have to do this." And I said, "You've been doing so much for me with the surgery coming up. I wanted to do something for you." She kissed me. I tasted her lipstick and I felt absolutely nothing. The part of me that had loved this woman 3 weeks earlier was still there, but it had been sealed behind glass. I could see it, but I couldn't reach it. What I felt instead was a cold electric focus, the awareness that I was now performing a role, and the performance had to be flawless because 17 years of my life depended on it. This was the masquerade. And if you've never had to sit across from someone who is actively dismantling your life and smile at them, and ask them about their day, and pass them the bread, if you've never had to do that, I hope you never do. Because it is a kind of violence to yourself that doesn't leave marks. Every muscle in your jaw is working to keep your expression neutral. Your hands want to grip the edge of the table, so you make them hold a fork instead. Your breathing wants to accelerate, so you time your inhales to the pauses between her sentences. You chew food that has no taste. You swallow wine that could be water. And you respond to lies in real time, matching their energy, reflecting their casualness. Because if your response is 1 degree too flat or 1 degree too sharp, the whole thing unravels before you're ready. One night during the masquerade, I think it was 9 or 10 days before surgery, Renee was on the phone in the bedroom. I was in the hallway. She didn't know I was there. She was talking to Devin, and she was laughing, and she said, and this is the sentence that plays on a loop in my head, the one that I heard through the wall, with my back pressed against the drywall and my hand over my own mouth to keep from making a sound. She said, he's like, sei seid so grateful. My come by him. Hand at a handling everything while he's sick, that he actually thanked me for the power of attorney. This man would hand you the keys to his life if you just smiled at him. I stood in that hallway for a long time after she hung up. I cataloged the feeling. That's what my mind did. It didn't collapse. It cataloged. It filed the sentence under evidence. It noted the tone. Not malicious, not angry, just amused. She was amused by my trust. She found it entertaining. The man she married, the man who had cooked her dinner an hour earlier, whose restaurant she was dismantling, whose brother she had recruited. He was funny to her. His loyalty was a joke. I went back to the kitchen and washed the dishes. When Renee came downstairs, I asked her if she wanted dessert. She said, You're too good to me, Marcus. I said, that's what partners are for. The next morning, I called Raymond Osei. Raymond was my father's business partner for 11 years before my father got sick. They ran a small contracting company together in the 90s. And when my father died, Raymond became a kind of silent uncle figure in my life. The man who showed up at the restaurant's opening night, who sent a card every year on the anniversary, who once told me, your father would have stood right here and cried. Raymond was the third member of a panel that Renee and Devin didn't know existed. This is the part of the story where I need to tell you about the thing my father built that saved me. 8 months before my diagnosis, before any of this, before the shell company, before the power of attorney, before the clone tablet, I had gone to my father's original attorney, a man named Harold Sims, and asked him to review my LLC operating agreement. It was routine. I was just tidying up the legal structure, making sure everything was current. Harold, who had known my father for 20 years, suggested adding a protective clause. He said, Marcus, businesses like yours are vulnerable during ownership transitions. Let me add a safeguard. The clause he drafted said this: any ownership transfer or amendment to the LLC operating agreement requires a 90-day review by a 3-member panel consisting of myself, my accountant Gloria Reyes, and my father's retired business partner Raymond Osei. If any amendment is filed without this review, all changes are automatically frozen until the panel convenes. Harold added the clause on page 19 of the operating agreement. Renee and Devin never read past page 4. Now I had the forensic report, the cloned messages, the forged signature evidence, and the protective clause. But I wasn't ready yet. Gloria said, we need more time. I said, surgery is in 18 days. She said, then we work faster, but we don't move early. If you confront them before we have everything documented and filed, they'll destroy evidence. They'll change the narrative. You get one shot at this, Marcus. One. She was right. The ticking clock was real. Once I went into surgery, the power of attorney would activate if I'd signed it, and Renee would have 6 weeks to do whatever she wanted while I was recovering. But I hadn't signed it. I'd been stalling. Renee asked about it every few days, gently, casually, always wrapped in concern. "Babe, did you get a chance to look at that estate plan? I just want to make sure we're covered before the surgery." I told her I'd been busy. I told her I'd sign it this week. I told her I wanted my own lawyer to glance at it first, just as a formality. And she smiled and said, "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. Max das seis faus." Meanwhile, Devin was accelerating. He started telling my staff that changes were coming to the restaurant. He told my 2 most loyal servers, women who had been with me for 5 and 7 years, that they should stay flexible and be open to new management structures. They didn't know what that meant, but they heard the implication. 2 of them quit within a week. When I found out, I felt a flash of rage so intense, my vision narrowed. Devin wasn't just stealing money. He was dismantling the culture of my restaurant, the relationships I'd spent years building, the trust my staff had in the stability of their workplace. He was salting the earth. And then came the charm offensive. 12 days before surgery, Renee organized a surprise dinner party at our house. She invited my mother, my closest friends, Gloria, even Raymond. She cooked, or more accurately, she had it catered from Whitfield's own kitchen without telling me. Send. Cannot she? She stood in our living room and raised a glass and said, "To Marcus, the strongest man I know. We are all going to be right here when he wakes up." Devin gave a speech. He stood next to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and with tears in his eyes, actual tears, he said, "My brother gave me a chance when nobody else would. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's what family is. And I'm going to make sure this restaurant runs perfectly while he heals. Because that's the least I can do for the man who saved my life." Everyone clapped. My mother cried. Renee squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back. I smiled. I thanked everyone. And I went to the bathroom, locked the door, gripped the edge of the sink, and stared at my own face in the mirror until the urge to walk out there and burn it all down passed through me like a wave and left me standing in its wake, empty and focused. Gloria finished the forensic report on a Thursday, 6 days before my surgery. 47 pages. Every forged invoice, every payment to Lakefront Provisions, every dollar amount, dated and documented, the shell company registration, the bank records showing the $74,000 flowing from my business account to Devin's company, screenshots of the messages between Renee and Devin, 14 months of planning, conspiracy, the drafted LLC amendment, the power of attorney strategy. Gloria had organized it like a prosecution file, because that's what it was. I sat in her office and turned every page. Page 31 was the one that broke through whatever wall I'd built. It was a spreadsheet showing the dates of the forged invoices mapped against my calendar. 11 of the 23 forged invoices were dated on days I had doctor's appointments for my heart condition. Devin had been timing the fake billings to days when he knew I'd be distracted, sitting in a cardiologist's office, worried about whether I'd survive a surgery that they were using as cover to rob me. When Gloria showed me page 31 of that report, I understood everything. Not just what they'd done, but how they thought about me. I was not a person to them. I was a schedule of vulnerabilities. 2 things happened in the next 4 days, and they happened simultaneously. First, I went to the Chase branch on Michigan Avenue and emptied our safety deposit box. Every original document, the LLC operating agreement with the protective clause, the restaurant lease, the insurance policies, the deed to the building. I moved to a new box at a different branch under a trust I'd established with Gloria and Raymond as co-trustees. Renee had a key to the original box. When she eventually went to access those documents, she would find nothing. Second, I transferred our joint savings, $112,000, into the trust. I did it quietly, in person, with a bank officer who didn't ask questions because the account was in my name as primary holder. The money moved on a Tuesday. Renee wouldn't check the account for 3 weeks. I did not sign the power of attorney. 4 days before surgery, I went to Harold Sims's office and signed a formal revocation of the power of attorney document Renee had given me, on the grounds that I had never executed it, but wanted the revocation on record as a precaution. Harold also helped me file a formal fraud complaint with the Illinois Secretary of State regarding Lakefront Provisions, LLC. The complaint would take time to process, but the filing was time-stamped. Whatever happened in surgery, whatever happened after, the machinery was now in motion. Devin almost caught me once. I want to tell you about that night because it's the closest I came to losing everything before I was ready. It was 4 days before surgery, the same day I filed the fraud complaint. I was parked outside the restaurant at 10:30 at night, in my car, in the small lot behind the building. I was listening through the cloned tablet. Renee and Devin were on the phone again, going over the timeline for the LLC amendment. They planned to file it on the 3rd day of my recovery, when I'd be in the ICU and unable to receive any documents or communications. Devon was pacing inside the restaurant. I could hear his footsteps on the hardwood, and at some point he walked to the back door and looked out into the parking lot. He saw my car. I watched him freeze through the tablet's audio. There was a pause, a shift in his breathing, and then he said to Renee, "Hold on. Marcus's car is in the lot." Renee's voice tightened. "What? Why would he be there this late?" Devin said, "I don't know. Let me check." I turned off the tablet, reclined my seat, and sat in the dark. My heart, my damaged, scheduled for surgery heart, was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Devin came out the back door. He looked at my car. He walked toward it. I was holding my breath, calculating whether I could pretend I'd come back for something I forgot, whether the lie would hold, whether my face would hold. He was 10 feet away when his phone buzzed. He looked at it, turned around, and went back inside. I heard him tell Renee, "Car's empty. He probably left it here and took an Uber home after drinks. He does that sometimes." Renee exhaled. "Okay, don't scare me like that." Oh, I sat in that car for another 40 minutes until Devin left, and the restaurant was dark. My shirt was soaked through with sweat. The surgery happened on a Monday. Dr. Adeyemi replaced the valve. I was in the operating room for 5 hours. I woke up in the ICU with Renee holding my hand, and Devin standing at the foot of the bed with flowers. They smiled at me with the faces of people who were counting down the days until they could take everything I'd built. I smiled back. I said, "Thank you for being here." The masquerade had entered its final phase. What Renee and Devin didn't know was that I had planned to return to the restaurant 10 days post-surgery. Dr. Adeyemi had told me that light activity was possible after 10 days, if recovery went well. Renee thought I'd be home for 6 weeks, minimum. She told Devin they had until week 3 to file the amendment. They had 18 days of runway, by their calculation. They had 10. I healed faster than anyone expected. On day 8, I was walking laps around the hospital floor. On day 9, I was discharged. Renee drove me home and tucked me into bed and brought me soup she'd bought from Whitfield's, my own soup, from my own kitchen, served to me by the woman who was stealing my life. And I ate it and told her it was delicious. On day 10, I called a staff meeting. I told Renee and Devin separately. To Renee, I said I wanted to check in with the team, just briefly, to show my face, and boost morale. She said, "Are you sure you're up for it? You just had surgery." I said, "It'll be 30 minutes. I'll sit the whole time." To Devin, I said, "Staff meeting at 4. Make sure everyone's there. I want to thank them for holding it down." Devin said, Absolutely, bro. This'll be good for everyone. He texted Renee. He wants a staff meeting. We should come prepared with the amendment paperwork in case we can get him to sign while he's feeling grateful. Renee texted back, perfect. Bring it. The restaurant was set up before they arrived. Gloria had come at 2 o'clock with her laptop and a projector, which she connected to the screen we used for private events. Raymond arrived at 2:30. He sat at the bar with a glass of water and the 47-page report in a manila folder. I sat at a table in the center of the dining room, facing the door. The turntable was on the table next to me. I'd brought it from the office. I don't entirely know why. Maybe I wanted my father in the room. The late afternoon light was coming through the front windows at a low angle, catching the dust motes hanging in the air above the communal table. And the whole room had that golden weighted stillness it gets between lunch service and dinner prep, when the kitchen is quiet and you can hear the building breathe. The staff arrived first. Andre, Janelle, the servers, the line cooks. They sat at the long communal table along the east wall. They looked nervous. Devin's changes are coming comments had poisoned the atmosphere, and 2 of their colleagues had already quit. I said, sit tight. This won't take long. Janelle caught my eye as she sat down. She didn't say anything, but she tilted her head slightly, the way she does when she's reading a room, and I could see her registering the projector, the screen, Raymond at the bar. She knew this wasn't a morale visit. Devin arrived at 4:05. He was wearing a blazer, which he never wore to the restaurant. He had a leather portfolio under his arm. I could see the edge of documents inside it. Cream-colored paper, the kind attorneys use, with a blue backer visible along the spine. He smiled at me. That Devin smile. The one that had been getting him out of trouble since he was 12 years old. Looking good, bro. Can't believe you're up and around already. He pulled out a chair and sat, setting the portfolio flat on the table in front of him. His fingers rested on top of it. Protective. Eager. Renee arrived at 4:10. She'd done her makeup, her hair like she was coming to a presentation. She kissed my cheek. Her lips were cool, and I could smell the perfume she wore to important meetings. The Tom Ford one. Not her everyday scent. And she sat next to Devin at the table nearest the kitchen. She had a second copy of the LLC amendment in her purse. I know this because I'd read her text messages confirming it the night before. She crossed her ankles beneath the table and folded her hands and waited with the composed patience of someone who believed she was about to receive something. I stood up. It took effort. My chest was still healing, and the movement pulled at the incision site, a sharp thread of pain running along the sternum where they'd wired me back together. But I stood, because I needed to be on my feet for this. The chair legs scraped the hardwood. The sound carried through the silent dining room, like a match strike. I said, "Thank you all for coming. I asked everyone here today because there are some things about this restaurant, about this business, and about what's been happening behind my back that need to be said out loud, in this room, in front of everyone." Devin's smile didn't change yet, but I watched his eyes. There was a flicker, a microsecond recalculation, the kind you only catch if you're looking for it. His left hand moved a 1/4 inch closer to the portfolio, as if to confirm it was still there. Renee crossed her legs. Her right foot began a slow, almost imperceptible bounce, the only sign that something in my tone had landed differently than she expected. I said, "Gloria, can you put up the first slide?" Gloria opened her laptop. The projector hummed to life, the fan whirring softly in the quiet room. On the screen appeared the registration page for Lakefront Provisions LLC. Devin's name, Devin's home address on North Kedzie, the filing date 5 months ago. The dining room was silent, except for the hum of the walk-in cooler in the kitchen, which I could hear through the pass-through window, and underneath that, the sound of my own heartbeat filling the empty air. I could feel the surgical scar pulling with each beat, a reminder that the heart they'd tried to use against me was still working. Devin said, "What is this?" His voice came out steady, but I heard the breath he took before speaking. A quick, shallow intake. The kind you take when cold water hits your skin. I said, "That's a shell company registered in your name at your home address." "Gloria, next slide." The next slide was a side-by-side comparison. A genuine invoice from one of our real suppliers, and a Lakefront Provisions invoice. Same format, same layout, different company. At the bottom of the Lakefront invoice, my signature, or rather, the forged version of it. Gloria had circled the differences in red. The M that didn't drop left, the D whose tail didn't curve back. Small deviations. Invisible if you weren't looking. Damning if you were. Over the past 9 months, I said, 23 invoices were submitted from Lakefront Provisions to Whitfield's business account. No deliveries were ever made. No product was ever received. The total amount billed and paid was $74,000. Every invoice was authorized with a forged signature stamp. I let the number sit in the air. 74,000. I watched it land on the faces of my staff. People who earned $15, $18, $22 an hour in that kitchen, doing honest work. Devin stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood, louder than mine had, more abrupt. The legs catching on a groove in the floor, before jerking free. "Marcus, hold on. This is a misunderstanding. I set up that LLC as a side project. I was trying to start a catering supply business. I was going to bring you in on it. I just hadn't gotten around to explaining." "Gloria," I said. "Y'all, next slide, bank records." The Lakefront Provisions account at a credit union in Humboldt Park. Deposits matching every invoice amount, withdrawals to Devin's personal checking account. Dates, amounts, routing numbers, every dollar traced, every transfer dated. The numbers filled the screen in neat columns, black text on white, the kind of documentary evidence that doesn't need interpretation. It just needs to be read. Devin's mouth was still open, but no words came out. I watched the muscles in his jaw working, searching for a sentence that could contain what was on the screen, and finding nothing. His eyes moved to Renee. That movement, that involuntary turn toward his co-conspirator, looking for the script, looking for the next line. That's when I knew the next part would involve her, and she knew it too, because she uncrossed her legs and sat forward in her chair. Her hands, which had been folded, separated and gripped the edge of the table. "Let me play you something," I said. I took out my phone and connected it to the restaurant's Bluetooth speaker, the same speaker we used for music during service, the one mounted above the bar. The connection chime echoed in the room. The first recording was from 9 days ago. Renee and Devin discussing the LLC amendment timeline on the phone. Renee's voice filled the dining room, clear and confident, bouncing off the exposed brick walls and the tin ceiling tiles. "We file on day 3 of recovery. He'll be in the ICU. He won't see anything until it's done." The sound of her voice in that room, a voice the staff had heard laugh and congratulate and toast at the dinner party, did something to the air. I could see Andre's posture change, his shoulders pulling back, his chin dropping slightly. One of the line cooks, a kid named Marco, who had been with us for 8 months, turned his head toward the speaker as if he needed to confirm it was really coming from there. Renee's face went white, not gradually, instantly, like someone had pulled a plug. The color drained from her cheeks downward, past her jaw, into her neck. She said, "Well, Marcus, where did you get that? You can't just..." Her voice broke on the second sentence, not from emotion, from the sudden absence of a plan. "Second recording," I said. This one was from the pre-surgery dinner party, the one where she toasted my strength. But it was from after the party, after everyone had gone home, when she and Devin were on the phone an hour later. Devin's voice. That speech was my best work, right? The tears were a nice touch. Renee, laughing. Oscar-worthy. He was so moved he squeezed my hand. Devin. This man is unbelievable. More laughter. Their laughter played through the speaker and hit the walls and came back, filling the dining room with the sound of 2 people who had stood in this same space hours earlier and performed love for an audience. In the dining room, Andre set down the pen he'd been holding. It rolled 3 inches across the table and stopped against a water glass. Janelle put her hand over her mouth. I could see her fingers pressing into her own cheek, hard, like she was keeping something inside. The servers were motionless. Raymond at the bar removed his reading glasses and looked at Devon with an expression I can only describe as the absence of something, the absence of any remaining benefit of the doubt. He folded the glasses slowly and set them on the bar top next to his water. The ice in the glass had melted. He hadn't touched it. "Third recording," I said. Renee stood up. Her chair didn't scrape. She rose smoothly, her body reverting to the controlled, presentational posture she used in sales meetings. "Marcus, stop. Please. We can talk about this privately. This doesn't need to happen in front of everyone." Her voice had found its footing again. She was trying to reframe the room, to convert a public exposure into a private matter, to draw a curtain around what was happening. "Sit down, Renee." 2 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was so still that the words carried the weight of everything behind them. 18 days of masquerade, 14 months of their planning, 17 years of my work. Renee looked at me. She searched my face for the man who poured her Sancerre and asked if she wanted dessert. She didn't find him. She sat down. The third recording was the one from the hallway. Renee's voice, whispering through the wall, thinking she was alone. "He's so grateful I'm handling everything while he's sick that he actually thanked me for the power of attorney. This man would hand you the keys to his life if you just smiled at him." The room was so quiet I could hear someone's phone vibrating on silent mode across the dining room, a low, insistent buzz against the wooden tabletop, going unanswered. I let the silence hold for 5 seconds. 10. 15. I wanted Devon and Renee to sit inside that silence and feel it pressing on them, the way their conspiracy had pressed on me for months. I watched Devon's hands. They had fallen away from the leather portfolio. He wasn't touching the documents anymore. The amendment he'd brought, the one he was going to slide across the table while I was feeling grateful, it sat there untouched, irrelevant, a relic of a plan that had already died. Then I said, "Gloria, the full report, please." Gloria projected the complete forensic financial report. 47 pages. She advanced through it slowly. The shell company structure, the forged signatures, the invoice to payment trail, the timeline of the conspiracy mapped against my medical appointments, the drafted LLC amendment, the power of attorney analysis, the 14 months of messages. Every page was a floor collapsing. Devon watched the first 10 pages standing up. He had risen again without seeming to decide to, his body pulling him upward as if he could somehow get above what was happening. By page 15, he had sat back down. His blazer, the one he'd put on for this occasion, had bunched at the shoulders. He didn't adjust it. By page 20, he had his head in his hands. His fingers were threaded through his hair, gripping. By page 30, page 31, the one that mapped the forged invoices to my cardiology appointments, he was looking at the table. Just the table. The grain of the wood, the small scratch near the edge where a bus tub had caught it years ago. He stared at that scratch like it was the only safe thing left in the room. Renee tried tears. Halfway through the report, she started crying. The kind of crying she'd used at the pre-surgery dinner. The kind that usually made me cross a room to hold her. Her shoulders hitched. She pressed a knuckle below her left eye to catch the moisture. Before it reached Hengard. Horror. Bore. Fora. She said, "Marcus, I love you. I was trying to protect us. Devon convinced me this was the best way to keep the business safe while you were sick. I didn't understand what I was getting into." Her voice cracked at exactly the right moment. Her shoulders shook at exactly the right rhythm. It was a perfect performance. I had seen her rehearse it, or rather, I had heard her rehearse variations of it in phone calls with Devon. "If he ever finds out I cry, I blame you. He'll believe me." She'd said that 4 months ago. I'd read it on the cloned tablet. I said, Renee, on February 14th of this year, Valentine's Day, you sent Devin a message that said, and I quote, "The business is worth at least $1.2 million with the lease and the equipment. If we can get him to restructure the LLC with both of us inside, we don't even need the medical angle. But if something medical comes up, that's our window." That was 3 weeks before my diagnosis. I paused. The projector fan hummed. A car horn sounded somewhere outside on the street. Distant and ordinary. The world going on. You weren't protecting us. You were waiting for me to get sick. The tears stopped. Not gradually. They stopped. Like a faucet turning. What replaced them was something I'd never seen on Renee's face before. The expression of a person who has run out of masks. Raw, unscripted, and for the first time in our marriage, honest. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. The performance was over. Not because she chose to end it, but because there was no audience left to perform for. Every person in that room had heard the recordings. Every person had seen the documents. She looked at Devin. Devin didn't look back. He was still staring at the table, at that scratch in the wood, at nothing. "There's one more thing," I said. I reached across the table and slid a document toward both of them. Notarized, dated 4 days before my surgery. It was the form of fraud complaint I'd filed with the Illinois Secretary of State regarding Lakefront Provisions, LLC, along with the revocation of the power of attorney. The paper made a soft sound sliding across the wood. A whisper of a sound, the kind of sound a door makes when it closes quietly and permanently. I revoked the POA before I went into surgery. It was never active, and the fraud complaint has been in process for 3 weeks. Devin's head came up. His face was gray, not pale. Gray, the color of something that has had the life pulled out of it. The blazer sat wrong on his shoulders. His eyes were wet, but the tears didn't fall. They sat there, suspended, undecided. He said, "Marcus, I'm your brother." I said, "I know, that's why this hurts." 17 seconds passed. I counted them. 17 seconds of Devin looking at me and me looking back. And in that space, every shared meal, every covered rent check, every co-signed loan, every Memorial Day cookout, and every Sunday in our father's kitchen moved between us like a current that neither of us could stop and neither of us could hold. Raymond spoke for the first time. He stood up from the bar, slowly, the way a man stands when he wants his standing to mean something, and walked to the table. His shoes measured on the hardwood, each step deliberate. He set the manila folder down in front of Devin. The folder landed with a flat, definitive sound. "Page 19 of the operating agreement," he said. His voice was low, steady, carrying the particular gravity of a man who had spent 11 years as James Whitfield's partner and knew exactly what this restaurant was supposed to be. The one you didn't read. Any ownership transfer or amendment requires a 90-day review by a 3-member panel. Marcus, Gloria, and myself. Your amendment filing triggered the clause automatically. Everything is frozen. You didn't just fail to steal this business, son. You locked yourself out of it. Devin looked at the document. He looked at Raymond. He looked at me. And then he said, the last thing he said to me that night, the last thing he said to me at all, "Dad would be ashamed of you." I let that land. I felt it try to find a soft place inside me. Felt it move through my chest, past the surgical scar, into the space where I kept my father's memory. And I felt it fail. It found no purchase, because my father built this. My father handed me $6,000 in a kitchen in Bronzeville and told me to make something. My father's turntable was on the table next to me, the wood paneling catching the projector's residual light, the Sony logo facing Devin like a witness. If there was a man in this room my father would be ashamed of. It was the one who had taken his name and used it to forge signatures on fraudulent invoices. I said, "Devin, you're terminated effective immediately. You are barred from this property. You will be hearing from my attorney regarding a civil fraud lawsuit. Renee, you will be hearing from a divorce attorney. The prenuptial agreement, the one you also didn't read carefully." Forces zero equity claim on the business in the event of divorce caused by financial malfeasance. I looked at both of them. The late afternoon light had shifted while we'd been sitting there. It no longer came through the front windows. The dining room had dimmed, and the projector's glow was the brightest thing in the room. "You can go now." Devin left first. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't take the leather portfolio. It sat on the table, the amendment documents inside it, already meaningless. He walked straight out the front door and into the evening. Through the windows, I could see the streetlights had come on along the block. The door swung shut behind him, with the soft, pneumatic hiss of the closer, and then he was a silhouette on the sidewalk. And then he turned the corner. And then he was gone. Renee sat for another 30 seconds. She looked at me with an expression that cycled through 4 or 5 emotions in rapid succession. Anger, shame, calculation, fear, and finally something that might have been grief, though I couldn't tell anymore which of her emotions were real and which were strategic. She picked up her purse, the one with the second copy of the amendment inside it, the one she'd brought like a backup weapon, stood and walked out. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, each step slightly faster than the last, until the door closed behind her and the sound stopped. The staff sat in stunned silence. The dining room felt like a room after a storm. The pressure had dropped, the air had changed, and everything looked the same, but wasn't. Andre was the first to speak. He cleared his throat once, then again, and said, "Chef, we're not going anywhere." Janelle nodded. The line cooks nodded. Marco, the kid who'd been with us for 8 months, said quietly, "We got you, Chef." I said, "Thank you. That's all I need to hear." Gloria closed her laptop. The projector fan wound down and the screen went dark. Raymond put his reading glasses back on and squeezed my shoulder as he walked past. A firm, wordless grip that lasted 3 seconds and said more than any sentence could have. The dining room was empty except for me, the projector's blank screen, and the turntable on the table. Still and silent. I sat there for a long time. The walk-in cooler hummed. The ice machine in the bar dropped a load of cubes with a muffled crash. The building settled around me the way it always did in the quiet hours. Small creaks, the tick of the heating system, the sounds of a place that was still standing. If you're still listening right now, and this story is sitting heavy on your chest, please hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and then come right back, because I need to tell you what happened after. The collapse came in stages, and I want to be specific, because I spent months watching my life get dismantled in secret. And there was a particular kind of justice in watching the dismantler's life meet daylight. The LLC amendment filing triggered the protective clause exactly as Harold Sims had designed it. All changes froze. A 90-day review period began, overseen by myself, Gloria, and Raymond. Devin's 49% never existed. It was a document filed into a system that was designed to catch exactly this kind of document. The amendment was formally rejected by the panel within 2 weeks. Raymond signed the rejection letter on a Tuesday morning at Gloria's office. He set the pen down afterward and said, "Your father would have caught this too. You come from careful people, Marcus." Gloria notarized the document without a word. The page made a clean, final sound under the embosser. The Illinois Secretary of State's office flagged Lakefront Provisions LLC for fraudulent vendor invoicing within a month of my complaint. The investigation is ongoing. Devin received a formal notice requiring him to produce all financial records associated with the company. His attorney Renee's $2,200 had paid for, quietly withdrew from representation when the scope of the fraud became clear. The withdrawal letter arrived on a Friday. By Monday, Devin was searching for new counsel. 3 firms declined before one agreed to take him on, and that firm required a $12,000 retainer. $12,000 from a man who no longer had a salary. Renee discovered the empty safety deposit box on a Thursday. I know because Gloria told me Renee had called Gloria frantic, asking if Marcus had moved the documents. Gloria said, "I can't help you, Renee." That was the entire conversation. 4 words. Renee went to the Chase branch on Michigan Avenue and stood at the counter and opened a box that contained nothing. Every original document, the operating agreement, the lease, the insurance policies, the deed, was gone. Marcus had moved them 3 weeks before she expected to strike. I imagine her standing there, looking into an empty metal box, the fluorescent lights of the vault humming above her, and understanding for the first time that the man she'd dismissed as trusting and grateful and easy had been 3 moves ahead of her for a month. That empty box was the first honest mirror she'd looked into since our wedding. The joint savings account, $112,000, was in the trust. Renee discovered this when she tried to make a withdrawal and was told the account had been closed. The teller's words, relayed to me later through my attorney, were simple. "This account no longer exists in this form, ma'am." The trust, established with Gloria and Raymond as co-trustees, was beyond her reach. Renee's paralegal friend Jessica, who had drafted the power of attorney, was reported to the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission for unauthorized practice of law. A paralegal cannot draft legal documents for clients independently. That requires attorney supervision, and Jessica had none. The complaint is still being reviewed, but Jessica has not drafted any documents since. Devin was evicted from his apartment 4 months after the confrontation. Without his salary from Whitfield's, and with the civil fraud lawsuit consuming whatever savings he had in legal fees, he couldn't make rent. The landlord on North Kedzie, the same address listed on the Lakefront Provisions registration, filed the eviction on a Monday. Devin had 14 days to vacate. Last I heard, he was staying with a cousin on the far south side. He has not contacted me. He has not contacted our mother. Our mother, who cried at my wedding and cried at the dinner party, and who spent her whole life believing her 2 sons would take care of each other, called me once after everything came out. She said, "Marcus, I don't understand. I don't understand how this happened." I said, "Neither do I, Mom, but it did." She's grieving a version of her family that may never have been real. I call her every Sunday. We don't talk about Devin. We talk about the weather, her garden, the restaurant. The silences between subjects are longer than they used to be. Renee was served divorce papers 5 weeks after the confrontation. The prenuptial agreement, which she had signed without objection because she believed it would never matter, because she believed she'd control the business through other means, enforced 0 equity claim on the restaurant. The divorce is proceeding. I don't see her. I don't speak to her. The woman I married, the woman who held my face in her hands and told me we'd get through the surgery together, the woman who stood in my living room and toasted my strength while counting down the days until she could take everything, she is becoming a legal file, a set of documents, a matter being handled by attorneys. That's what love becomes when the person you loved never existed. The restaurant survived. That's the part that still surprises me. Not because I doubted the food or the staff, but because I underestimated how much damage Devin and Renee had already done to the culture. The 2 servers who quit came back after the confrontation, both of them with authority. So voilà où ça suyer semangs With a will without being asked, Andre and Janelle rebuilt the kitchen schedule around my recovery. Vendors who had been confused by Devin's inquiries about margins and lease terms were reassured. One phone call at a time. The Lakefront Provisions invoices were flagged and reversed where possible. We recovered $31,000 of the $74,000, which is less than half, but more than nothing. The restaurant didn't just survive. It clarified, like a broth that's been simmering too long and you finally skim off the impurities, and what's left is clean. I need to tell you about one more night. It was a Wednesday, about 6 weeks after the confrontation. The restaurant was closed. I was alone. I'd stayed after the last server left because I didn't want to go home. Home being at that point the one-bedroom apartment I'd rented in Ukrainian. Yukurdur Josram. After moving out of the house Renee and I had shared. The apartment was small, the kitchen had a 4-burner stove and a window that faced a brick wall, but it was mine. And nobody in it was planning anything against me. And there is a kind of peace in a space that holds only what you've chosen to put there. I was sitting at a table in the dining room with the lights down, low. The room smelled like rosemary and fresh bread from the last service. The scent had settled into the tablecloths, the curtains, the wood itself. 17 years of rosemary had made the walls remember it. I had the turntable on the table. I put on a Marvin Gaye record. What's Going On? The same album my father played at every cookout. The same album that drew customers to the food truck from half a block away. The needle touched the vinyl, and the room filled with that warm analog sound. The faint crackle before the first note. The soft pop of dust in the groove. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was performing. I wasn't smiling for anyone. I wasn't holding my jaw steady. I wasn't timing my breathing. I was just sitting in a room that belonged to me, listening to music that belonged to my father, and being honest with the silence. I poured 2 glasses of wine. Out of habit. 3 years of marriage will embed a habit so deep you don't even notice it happening. Your hand just reaches for the sex's second glass. Your wrist turns. The wine falls, and it's done before your brain catches up. I set them both on the table. I looked at the second glass for a long time. The wine was dark in the low light, nearly black, and the glass caught a faint reflection of the turntable's spinning platter. Then I stood up, walked it to the kitchen sink, and poured it down the drain. I watched the red wine swirl against the stainless steel and disappear. The last of it clung to the basin for a moment, a thin rivulet tracing the curve of the drain, and then it was gone. That was my goodbye. Not to Renee. I'd already said goodbye to Renee. That was my goodbye to the version of my life where I poured 2 glasses, where I assumed there was someone across the table who deserved what I was offering, where trust was automatic. I sat back down. The turntable was playing. Marvin was singing about mercy, about what's happening. The dining room smelled like rosemary. My chest was healing. The scar was still pink and tender. A raised line down my sternum that I could trace with my fingertip. But the valve was working. Doing what valves do, opening and closing without asking for permission or gratitude. And I realized something sitting there that I want to say carefully, because it's the truest thing I've learned from all of this. I used to think trust was a gift you give to people who share your blood or your bed. I was wrong. Trust is a structure. It has load-bearing walls. It has a foundation. And just like a building, you have to inspect it. You have to maintain it. You have to know what's on page 19. The people who tell you that protecting yourself is selfish, that verifying is the same as accusing, That family means unconditional access. Those people are usually the ones who benefit most from your open doors. Boundaries are not betrayal. Locks are not insults. Knowing what's in your own operating agreement is not paranoia. It's the minimum price of keeping what you built. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, the median duration of occupational fraud schemes is 12 months before detection. And in cases involving family members or trusted insiders, that number climbs even higher, because the victim's own loyalty functions as the best camouflage the fraudster could ask for. And the American Bar Association reports that power of attorney abuse is one of the fastest growing categories of financial exploitation in the United States, precisely because it targets moments of medical vulnerability when the victim is least able to review what they're signing. I'm not telling you these numbers to scare you. I'm telling you because I lived them. If someone in your family has ever made you feel guilty for protecting what you built with your own hands, if they called you selfish for locking a door that was yours to lock, I need you to hear this. Boundaries are not betrayal. The door was always yours. The key was always yours. The question isn't whether you trust them. The question is whether they've earned the access they're asking for, and whether you've read the documents before you sign. What would you have done if the person plotting against you shared your last name? That's the story. One turntable that played through every chapter. One 47-page report that turned suspicion into proof. One protective clause on page 19 that caught the trap before it could close. If you've ever sat across from someone and felt that pebble in your shoe, that small, nameless thing that doesn't fit, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you noticed. Tell me what you did. Subscribe if this reached you. Share it with someone who's protecting